We're back.
We're back. This is many people don't realize, but something very big happened. We joined the striking writers of the WGA, and so
we've been on the picket line for a month.
Yeah, in solidarity, we've been away from this podcast, and they finally struck a deal this morning. TV shows are coming back. The vast writing staff we have for this podcast finally gets to return to work. We've been whipping them behind closed doors for months, but
you know what's funny? You know what's funny about this writer's strike? I feel like a lot of people that I've talked to don't even know what's going on. They either don't know what's going on, or they have some awareness of it, but just don't even understand the impact. And I think it's because we all watch TV shows on demand now, or we just stream reruns of shows that we used to watch 20 years ago, and the knowledge of live TV or I guess new TV being out there and being on strike since basically January. It's been this entire year they've been on strike. No one seems to notice or care. So I'm glad I'm glad that the strike is over because we do need some new TV shows. I mean, I watch SNL, so it's if you're an SNL viewer, you haven't had anything to watch.
You're the one.
I'm the one
group that watches SNL.
I mean, it's not what it used to be for sure. But it is something to watch. It is a nice show and it's very topical. You'll always get the current events. If you don't get your news from anywhere else, at least get it from SNL, I guess.
I think that the other thing that we would start noticing, and by the way, it's probably still going to happen because there is a ramp up period. These shows aren't just going to suddenly there's new episodes next week.
Yeah.
Right? It is now we're getting to the point where shows' new seasons would be starting.
Yeah.
And some of these shows are just going to be delayed for a half a year or whatever. And I mean, I don't, I'm fully we just started rewatch, or I guess we've never really streamed it, but we're watching Scrubs. So I don't know how our TV streaming affects the writers, if watching old shit matters.
Well, that's what they were striking for. That's what I believe. That's why they were really striking, is because there's so many people watching shows streaming and on demand now, and writers don't really get paid for that.
Right.
So there were some I remember hearing some examples of shows that had just really boomed on Netflix that maybe hadn't done so well on standard television back in the day. Sure. And the only people who were really making money off that were studio execs or the streaming services themselves. So
maybe someone that's got ownership points, but not someone that's getting residuals necessarily.
Right. Yeah, the writers went on strike, the actors went on strike, but it sounds like they're going to get what they want now, which is good. I always support a writer. Having been a writer to some degree in the past, I'm always going to support.
And having been a writer, I think most of them are annoying, but I don't necessarily think that they don't deserve jobs. Also, I think I do think that by the way, I have a very lo-fi version today, and every time I look up, in my peripheral, I see my stupid under my chin. I hate my.
It's a really bad angle.
It's a bad angle, but it's also it's a tough scene in this room right now. But anyway, look, we should stop talking about this because that's not the reason we haven't been doing podcasts. We stopped doing so before the big event in your life. My life was a scheduling nightmare. So
you really got back on the Comedy Roadshow and started going all sorts of places.
Sure, and also, but to do this podcast, we were really, even though I'm unemployed. We were having a hard time coordinating times anyway. And then something happened in your life that, listen, I was thinking maybe he doesn't want to talk about it publicly. And then I saw your Twitter and Instagram posts yesterday and your wife's Twitter posts. And I was like, okay, I think I'm safe to make this a topic of the podcast. You adopted a child.
Yes, we had a child. We did not adopt. It probably would be easier in some ways to adopt. You miss the formative baby years, which I haven't been getting much sleep lately. Although yesterday we took our 3.5-week-old baby to a Mariners game for the first time.
Which is impressive. I will give you credit for that.
You can tell it's impressive based on the reactions of the people who see the baby, right? They're like, oh my God, this baby's so small. And for us, we felt like we were ready. We were ready to take this baby out into the world. Granted, a baseball game is kind of a crazy environment, especially one like the one the Mariners are in right now, where they're in a pennant race and it's more or less a sellout. But yeah, people seem surprised that we were ready to do that so early. But things have been going well, man. We our baby was born at the beginning of the month. Almost, we're closing in on a month old now, and every day is the same, basically.
Yes.
When you're on parental leave, every day is the same. I lose track of the days of the week. I know that every 3 hours I'm going to be helping to feed a baby in some capacity. So it's a lot of waking up, usually 2 wake ups over the course of the night. And as those nights compound, you definitely get more tired. But it hasn't been like, I think I came into this with such low expectations and that this was going to be so difficult and so hard for me that if you set that bar down there so low, all you can do is have like a more or less positive experience. So it's been really great so far. We're very happy. And
I also think like if you can be a reason, first off, having parental leave makes it a lot easier, I can say from recent experience. Our first one, I had 6 days of unpaid leave, and I had to fight for the 6th day. And then this time, Washington State loves new dads, loves new parents, and so I'm still in my 12 weeks because they started a little while after she was born because of the stupid. By the way, you're probably doing your company's parental leave program. The Washington State parental leave you're also eligible for, by the way. It's like a 4-week waiting period before they actually review your case and approve or deny. And so I'm still in it. And it's like it's way easier because obviously you're like able to get all of the you get all of the satisfaction of being a parent because you spend the entire day being a parent. And so then you don't like I would come home from work and I'd feel guilty that my wife had to do 100% of everything while I was gone. So then I'd try to take over and then we'd try to go to sleep at the same time, which was stupid on our side. And this time we're like, it's way more relaxed.
Yeah, thankfully we've come a long way where, even the state of Washington will kind of back parental leave for people. So you get 12 weeks here, which is pretty great. I don't know how it works in other parts of the country. I have no idea.
Not that way.
Not as well as us, I imagine. Yeah. But yeah, it's pretty awesome to just be able to, I was thinking about it. I'm like, this is really one of the only times I'll be able to just forget about work for this long until I retire. So otherwise it's all, even if you go on a vacation, it's always going to be there in the back of your mind. But for the first time for close to 3 months, I'm not taking a full 12 weeks, but close to it, can just kind of like shut off work and not have to worry about what's going on and just be here raising my child. So that's cool, I guess. And honestly, like once you kind of get off the ground after the first week or two, I feel like this is kind of the case probably for any parent. Once you kind of get into the routine of what you're doing and how it's going to work, at that point, you really just kind of like, it's like a long weekend. It's like a 3-month long weekend. So that part's great. We watch a lot of dumb shows.
In a way, it's like a weekend. I will say like, drinking is different when you have a brand new baby. Like it's more taxing on your body. The impact.
Yeah, I have not been drinking much.
Right.
I'm not like a huge drinker. Like I will usually have like maybe 1 or 2 nights, maybe a little bit more than that, where I drink during the week, but I don't drink like copious amounts. It's like a glass of wine or something like that. And I really haven't done that yet. I did have a 24-ounce like ranch water at the baseball game last night, and I was thinking about it. Yeah, I know.
Your drinking decisions are so bad.
I don't like, dude. I've gotten to this point in my life, and of course, when I was in my 20s, man, I could put away like a 12-pack of beer very easily.
Sure.
But now beer does not do well with my stomach. It just does. I probably have some sort of intolerance to whatever's in there.
Sure.
So I can really only drink like seltzers and stuff like that at games, because I would ordinarily just drink like hard liquor. That's it. Like, but at a baseball game, it's a seltzer. So I had a 24-ounce seltzer and I was like, thinking about if I should get another one. It's still pretty early in the game. It's only like the 4th inning at this point. And I was like, nah, you really haven't been drinking that much. If you have 2 of these things, who knows how that'll turn out.
Yeah, that's a smart decision. Also, presumably at some point, well, I guess probably your wife, is your wife drinking or no?
She is not. had any drinks yet. She does drink, but
right.
I mean, she obviously didn't drink all through the pregnancy. She's not like a huge drinker, so her desire to get back on that horse, especially while feeding this baby, has been minimal. So I think it'll happen. We're actually in about 5 or 6 weeks. We're gonna do a cross country trip to North Carolina for a wedding that my wife is in. So, you know, if it was just like a friend's wedding or something, we might skip, but she's in the wedding.
Is this a drive or a flight?
No, we're taking a flight. We're taking the baby on a plane.
You made it sound like it was going to
cross country trip. Not to me. It's not like vacation.
Like we're getting in the old
no, that would be,
or whatever, and getting It
would take us like a week to get there by car. I feel like. So yeah, we're going on an actual. Yeah, we're actually going to fly out there, do this wedding thing, and we were talking about this because she's in the wedding, and you know, if you're a bridesmaid in a wedding, that day, or a groomsman, that day usually starts with like mimosas at like 9 a.m. as you get ready, right? And then it kind of evolves into more drinking throughout the day. And by the end of the night, if you're in a wedding party, you're probably drunk. Like there's not, unless you're just a non-drinker, you're probably drunk by the time the wedding's over. So we were talking about that, and I was like, look, you're going to have to have a few drinks before that day comes to kind of like build the tolerance a little bit, or you're going to be gone by like noon while everyone's still getting ready for the wedding. And I'm already like, hey, I've already resigned myself to the fact that at this wedding, I will be in charge of the baby pretty much the entire time. I'll have a couple drinks because I have some tolerance, but I'm not gonna drink a lot. And I think we're staying very close to the wedding venue, so it's not like we have far to go or anything. But yeah, it's going to be interesting because that'll be her first experience getting back into the swing of things.
Getting really back on the saddle.
Yeah.
Well, I will say, like, for us, and I'm not pressuring, because I feel like I want to know about the delivery experience a little bit, as much detail as you're willing to give, without your wife present. But when we went for the first kid, the experience was bad in that they were like very adamant about breastfeeding, and it made my wife feel very guilty when it wasn't working incredibly. And so we started supplementing with formula early, and this time it was like even earlier and guilt-free. Like by the way, that will there's a bunch of data that shows it doesn't matter for the kid, formula or breast milk. So for me, it was like a no-brainer. The only person it helps is the mother of the child, and I think that's like obviously important to both you and I, that the mothers of our children are as healthy as possible. But man, I haven't been on camera in a long time. I'm trying to pull my phone out of my pocket so I can.
This is what you look like now. God, I'm sorry.
I look like that guy on.
I don't know. You look the same to me.
No fucking neck.
You look the same to me, which might be good news or bad news. I don't know.
It's just
you might think you look like shit.
Like Ed from 90 Day Fiance. It's a bad fucking angle.
Somebody once told me, this was at a low point in my life where I felt like I was a real fat slob and out of shape, and they told me, I don't know, man, you pretty much always look the same to me. You've always looked the same to me. And I was like, God, that's terrible news. That is really bad news. That means when I think I'm hideous.
If you're an optimist or a pessimist, because that means like even at your best, you kind of look like a fat piece of shit.
Yeah, it wasn't like you always look the same to me, and I also want to fuck you. It was just like, sorry to tell you, you always look the same to me.
Oh man. So tell me though, like because you and I were I was trying to schedule a podcast when I found out that your wife was in labor, and you. It ended up being, I think, like a normal, because it always sounds, I used to have a joke where I would say how long my wife was in labor, and it was funny because anyone that's had a kid realizes that it was like roughly average, or maybe even a couple hours less than average on the first kid. But if you haven't had a kid, a 20-hour labor sounds insane.
Yeah, my wife's labor was 26 hours. I agree with you when you hear the number. It does seem like it's a grueling 26 hours, right? Like the entire time, it's like you're running a marathon, right? Your heart rate is elevated. That's not how it is at all, and not to discount the, what somebody goes through during labor. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is the first part, especially, is a little bit more chill. You kind of relax. Your contractions are going to be far apart, and then as things develop, it certainly gets very intense, especially towards the end. So yeah, my wife had a 26-hour labor. It's kind of started. We went to a Wednesday day game, Mariners game with she was going with her work.
Because you and I had joked either via text or on the podcast about how if you gave birth to this kid at the Mariners, you said, imagine all the free stuff we would get.
Yeah, well, it did jumpstart the labor, so that was, I guess, that was important. But we went to the day game, and I kind of figured, I mean, this was like 4 or 5 days earlier than our due date, which is generally unheard of with first kids. So if you've never had a child before, generally your first child comes past the due date. I mean, it's like something like 75% of deliveries or something like that. It's a very high number come at or after the due date. So we're about like 4 or 5 days prior to our due date at this point. We go to the Mariners game. Everything seems to be fine. It's a lot of walking around, though. You know, granted, when you're basically 9 months pregnant, you're not doing a ton of like moving around at that point. So I knew going to a Mariners game, you know, she was going to be moving a lot more than she really had been in recent weeks. And a lot of walking upstairs. And then on top of that, it was like a really exciting game. It was kind of a back and forth game that the Mariners ended up pulling out. So it was a wild environment. And we get done with the game. We're driving home, and then like contractions basically start in the car, which is not a good place to have. When you're in like rush hour traffic going home, and it's going to take about an hour to get there and have contractions start. I was feeling the anxiety of what she was going through in that moment, because I was like, do we need to go to the doctor, or like should we keep going home? And so we went home. Everything was, but when we got home, once we got out of the car, everything was fine. Contractions actually subsided, and she was like, I'm fine. It was just like a scare. So I had a softball doubleheader that night at 8:30 p.m. And a softball doubleheader that starts at 8:30 goes to about 11.
Sure.
So I knew I was going to be getting home around like 11:30 to 12 if I decided to go. And I asked her before I left, I was like, what do you think? Do you think I should stay? Like, do you think these contractions will come back? Do you think maybe labor will start? And she's like, I don't think so. I'll just go to softball. So I knew, I was like, okay, if I go to softball, absolutely labor is going to start sometime soon, because I'm exhausted. Like, yes. That morning, our dogs had woke me up at like 4:45 or something like that, like, which doesn't typically happen, but they had to go to the bathroom, wanted to go outside. So I let them out at like 4:45. And then until I had a kid, I've always been the type of person that does not fall back asleep very easily. So that morning I could not fall back asleep. So I'm awake at 4:45, which is much earlier than I usually get up. We go to the Mariners game. So we're out doing that all day, and then come back and do this late night doubleheader. So pretty long day, you know, getting up at 4:45, getting home at like midnight. I was exhausted, and I knew, I was like, this is definitely going to be the day that she goes into labor, because I'm going to be so tired. It's going to be the most tired I've been in months.
Because it's the least convenient possible day.
Yes, yes. And I had actually joked about this for like days leading up to this, just kind of looking at our schedule, knowing we had the Mariner game and softball. I was like, if I end up going to softball, it's going to be at the back end of this really long day. And so that's exactly what happened. So I came home from softball, and it's midnight, and I'm like, her contractions had just started up again. They're about, I don't know, 15 minutes apart, which is pretty lengthy. You know, you want to get it down to about 4 or 5 minutes before you go to the hospital.
Right.
So we knew we had a lot of time, but I was like, okay, I better eat now just in case we got to go in a couple hours. So we had some leftovers in the fridge. I made myself a snack at 12:30. Finally get into bed at about 1. I slept for like 3 or 4 hours that night. She was kind of up throughout the night dealing with all of this stuff. And then the whole next day, you know, our plan had been to just kind of stay at home and go through labor for as long as possible until we go into the birth center. And that's exactly what we did. So it took until about like 4:30 p.m. that next day before we went in. And
that's pretty, you guys are pretty chilled out for first-time parents.
She did a lot of research, and then towards the end pulled me into the the research and the videos too, which was good, because like I'm not the type of I would say neither one of us is. We're both type B, so neither one of us is super prepared. But she was very, very prepared for this. I mean, she did a ton of research, knew exactly how this was going to go. And that made me feel very confident. So when we got to the point where we were going to the hospital, it was like everything just kind of worked out the way it was supposed to. And, then got in there. She was only in labor in the hospital for about 6 hours before she delivered, which is very short, we've come to learn. Yeah. Most people are in there much longer than that. It ended up going as smoothly as anything can possibly go. She delivered like just after midnight that following day. So we finally got settled into like a room at like 5 a.m. once everything had kind of like all the aftermath of a birth, it's just it's kind of chaos for a little bit. And then those first couple of days, like basically got no sleep. And then kind of once we got home like 2 days or a day or two later, and have just kind of been in that routine ever since, man. I mean, you kind of figure it out, but yeah.
The thing I'll tell you about the hospital that makes it exhausting is that they come in and check on you every fucking 10 minutes, it feels like.
Yeah, our experience was different for sure. I know that can happen. I feel like we ended up having I won't say where we went, but we had a really good setup kind of based on where my wife works and like where we ended up going. And I thought they were awesome. We both thought they were really good. Just start to finish, the entire thing. It went really well, and they more or less left us alone. I think it was one of those things where it was like, once my wife made it clear that we kind of knew what we wanted to do and we didn't need like a ton of intervention from them or a ton of advice or help, they were like, all right, well, we'll just let you go. And they were cool about that. And that was kind of how it went for us. So that was really helpful. They were pretty much as hands off as you can be. And, yeah, man. I mean, then it was like we get home and it's like the parade of people who want to come by and see this baby for a few days. And then that kind of wears off. And then that's when the adrenaline wears off and you kind of start to get tired.
Did you do zero visitors in the hospital?
We didn't. My parents actually came by the next day at the hospital. They brought us dinner. Oh, nice. They were the only ones who came to the hospital. But our whole plan all along was we're not going to tell anybody that this baby is here until this baby is here. We didn't want people to come and be around during the delivery process because we'd seen how that had gone with some other people in my family, and it was just it's an additional layer of anxiety that you don't need to deal with if you can help it.
Absolutely. I fully agree
and
with
that is like one of those things I think you don't know until you've seen it up close, right, with your own family or friends. But while we were there, I mean, there's tons of people that are, there's other people that are giving birth at the same time in this hospital, and you can kind of walk out into the lobby and you see that there are people there that have their friends and family waiting, and it looks chaotic, and I've been one of those people at a hospital for a birth before in the waiting room, and I know how hard that can be for everybody involved. So I thought it went really well for us. It was a surprise to my whole family the next day when I was like, yeah, we had a baby, because we're still a few days before the due date, so no one, it was kind of good that it came before the due date, because my parents weren't like checking in on us to see how we were doing, which a lot of people will check in once that due date hits, kind of expecting every day, and they want to know. So if you happen to have your baby before its due date, no one's really going to bug you until you kind of control that whole narrative. So that was really nice. I mean, it was just, no offense to anybody who would have wanted to know right off the bat, but it was nice that we were able to kind of be left alone and just have our own time, Yeah,
so, I do think that whole process brings out what, if when you're around people that have anxiety, it brings out the worst parts of that anxiety. People who think you're like withholding information from them.
Absolutely.
Or I will say the first one we had people in the lobby. The second one we had nobody in the lobby. Not like out of some. First off, we were way ery. We were 3 weeks early, so it was like a different. We didn't even expect it.
I mean, it surprised me.
But also like, I mean the first one, you like almost feel an obligation to like entertain these people who are out there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I mean, this time it was like, no, and I didn't even tell anyone. We didn't even tell anyone that it was happening. I mean, one thing is it happened like we went to the hospital at 4 a.m. Like the first indications occurred at about 11 at night, and I was in a similar boat to you. It was like I was and we talked about it on the podcast, but I was like exhausted. I was a little buzzed, which was unfortunate.
Right.
But then, yeah, the labor thing, I ended up, by the way, we took like 3 different naps each in the delivery room, which was nice. But they also, when you show up at those, they treat you like, when you're a second-time parent, first one came out healthy, no complications, they treat you like middle management. They're like, we'll shit on you for a little bit because there's a bunch of first-time parents in here who are very stressed out. You guys seem cool. And also, when my wife's water broke, they don't want to do a lot of, like, they don't want to go in and check all the time because apparently it makes you prone to infection. Yeah. When the water's broken, I don't really understand the anatomy of that very well. But so there's like not a lot of information to give because it would be like literally 5 hours between checks because they're like, nothing's changing for you physically. So we don't want to keep putting instruments inside of you, you know?
Yeah. While you're waiting there, I mean, there's not a whole lot going on. You're just kind of like, you know, for her, it's just pain management basically as you're having contractions. And for me, it's just, you know, making sure she feels supported. And in between, you're just watching TV basically, you know, and just kind of waiting around for this thing to happen. But no, you're right about, I mean, even when we got there to the hospital, like their initial, I'm sure this happens a lot with them. You get so many people that react to scares that come in that are not ready to be admitted for delivery, right? That's a very common thing, I feel like. So when we got there, we were very chill. Like up till that point, everything had worked out really well for us. Like the car ride was smooth. We got super lucky about we got there at like 5:30 in the afternoon, in the evening. So like the parking lot was basically empty because all the people had gone home. A lot of people had gone home for the day. So we pulled right up, got an easy parking spot, walked right in. And I think we walked in like too chill because they were like ready to turn us away. They're like, "Are you sure you're ready to deliver?" And we were like, we're pretty sure because we'd been timing contractions and we knew like right where we were at. And as soon as they checked everything out, they were like, "Oh, you guys are like, you're more than ready. Let's get you into a room ASAP." Well, so they were, it was nice. It was kind of cool to like be like, "Oh, we impressed you." You know, like we're not the same losers that come in here and get turned away because they have no idea what they're doing.
You looked cool for the doctors. That was the goal the whole time, and you pulled it off.
We did it.
Well, yeah, congratulations. I feel like I've not asked a ton of questions, assuming we would podcast again. And then at a point, I was like, damn, are we ever... maybe I'm a dickhead friend for not asking.
No, it's the right amount. Again. It is interesting at this point, you know, once you have a baby and people kind of find out about it, which we had no issues like posting on our Instagrams or things like that about having a baby. So, you know, it's not something we wanted people to have to worry about. I know that can always be sensitive. Especially with family and friends who are like maybe overshares online, but we're like, you know, we do have some family members that are probably like tend to trend toward the overshare side, and maybe we are overshares too. So we're like, you know what, forget it. Like we'll kind of put this out there, and whatever happens, happens. But once people know about it, it's like everyone's always checking in, which is great. At times, it almost feels like too much. So the fact that you were kind of like, hey, hands off, I'll just let you do your thing, and you knew we'd reconvene at some point, that was I appreciate that because there are a lot of people that are just like every day checking in, and for sometimes it's great. So if it's the right people and they have the right delivery, awesome, you know, you don't mind at all. But there are other people that are like, hey, I know you're not doing anything right now because you're on leave, so I'm going to hit you up as much as I possibly can, and that's a little annoying.
Well, that's the kind of like that thing that I was talking about with the delivery room thing too, is people they take their anxiety and then they manifest it under the guise of like concern and care, but what it actually is like feeding their own or satiating their own anxiety, that's kind of the thing. Like I'm sure you get this question, like how are you sleeping? How tired are you? How much sleep have you gotten? And I'm like, none. The answer's none. You know the answer's none. Like we all know the answer's none. I'm fucking tired all the time. You know what I mean?
You know, I have a couple friends that like just don't know a ton about childbirth because they don't have kids and they don't have anyone close to them that's had kids. And I actually kind of like talking to them the most. And part of the reason why is because you're right. It's almost like there's a script that people have for somebody who's a new parent, right? Like they ask you how tired you are, how you're sleeping, what you've been doing, you know, like they have kind of like this script. But the people that have no clue about childbirth, they just treat you like the same old person. And it's like, that's how you want to be treated. Like, I don't feel like I feel like a lot everything has changed and nothing has changed, right? Like, I don't feel that much different. Other than I will say that when you become a parent, it doesn't take long for you to start judging whether other people you know should or should not have kids.
Yeah.
Because in the moment of delivery, I'm like, man, so-and-so, they should not have kids because they would not do well with this, man. They should just never procreate.
Is like, I kind of feel like the parenting. I've said this to people, and you can, you know, you're like pretty new in it, but I think you're a thoughtful enough person to at least be able to consider what I'm saying. Having a kid fucks your life up in a bunch of ways, obviously, and it makes it great in a bunch of ways. That's true. In a lot of ways, I think it simplifies your life because the decision matrix just narrows down to like,
sure, yeah,
I can't leave the kid at school, daycare, whatever. I can't, you know, we have to have somebody at home. So the answer is no for this thing because we have to have somebody at home. You know what I mean? Like I think that it just, for some people, I'm not saying have a kid to make yourself be more mature, but I do think there are people who are irrationally scared of the idea of having a kid. And it's like people who like you were saying, you're the kind of person who wasn't able to go to sleep. Well, you're going to be too tired to not be like, that's
it's not a problem now. Yeah.
I was like, I can barely ever take a nap. Not anymore. I'm great. I'll go take a nap right. I've had fucking 4 shots of espresso recently. I'll go take a nap right now. You know what I mean?
Well, and your body knows what to do, man. I mean, the last few weeks, I always feel like I wake up feeling like that feeling you get right before you get a cold. You know that feeling you get right before you get a cold where you can kind of feel something in the back of your throat and you're like, God damn it, tomorrow or the next day, I'm going to be sick. I have that feeling most days now, and then I just don't get sick. My body's just tired. It's just tired, but it knows what to do. And I've actually been like, I set up in my garage, like basically a home gym. And thank you to my work for allowing me to expense a lot of that stuff. But I typically would go to the gym most days. So for me, that was an escape. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to leave as often. So I set this up in my gym so that I could still work out. And I haven't done it like every day like I would before. But I've been forcing myself, even when I'm tired, to try and go down there and do some exercise because it actually, like, I think it's making my body better so that I can handle the tiredness that comes with being a new parent. I think that's just the reality of like being a new parent. And it's, you're right. I mean, there are some people that are irrationally afraid of it that like, you know, if they had a kid, they would figure it out. I think there's just so many people that are like, I can't conceptualize, I can't fathom having to try and figure out something like that. But there are also people we all know who are like, they're not bad people, but they are just they're just selfish people in a way. And it doesn't mean it's bad for everybody around them or it makes them bad. That's just who they are.
Right.
And those people are the ones I'm like, I don't know, man, you might not want to have a kid because if you have a kid, it's going to change your life so dramatically that you're probably going to hate it because I've never seen you in any realm where you weren't thinking about number one first. Right. And you can't be that way with a child. You cannot be thinking about yourself first. It's just not going to happen. As soon as that child comes out, you're going to be thinking about that child first and yourself second. So if that's not in your DNA, don't have a kid.
Yeah. But also, again, I think some of those people will be broken of those habits, but also people are having kids later. And you know, when you're 37 and you've been selfish your whole life, I think that maybe it's a little harder to break you out of it than when you're 21.
That's a big thing. It's a big thing, man. Like I think about that too. Like if I would have had kids 10 years ago, which is when a lot of people have kids, I wouldn't have been that prepared for it. Like it would have been a lot harder for me. Probably harder for my partner, whoever that might have been at the time, you know, like that probably been harder for everybody and ultimately harder for the child because we would have been worse parents, right? Like that's, so, I mean, I'm not telling anybody how to, like, you have your kid when you're ready or when the time comes, whatever happens, nature takes its course, or if you believe in Jesus taking the wheel, that can happen too. But whenever it happens, you're going to, you'll probably figure it out. But no, it's just, it's interesting. And I feel like, like I said, I feel like nothing's changed, but everything's changed. And, man, it's It's a good time to be a new parent because there is just so much happening in sports. In fact, the last few weeks, I was just as we've been watching endless sports because they're always on right now. I was like, God, we should probably be doing the podcast.
It's like exactly. Wouldn't it be nice to have a podcast during a time like this?
My wife and I basically just sit there and rant to each other about whatever sporting event we're watching and how it's going. So I mean, it's kind of like we have a podcast in our living room.
I will say, before we get into sports, because I do think we should talk about sports. One thing you said to me a long time ago that I thought was funny, but I didn't make fun of you for it at the time, was you were like, yeah, when we have a kid, I'm going to be dying to get away from my house for a couple hours. And I was like, yes and no. Like, of course you will. Like, the idea of leaving your house sounds very appealing until you're burdening another person with this responsibility solo, right? Like that.
Yeah, I mean, this right now is the most time away from my wife and kid I will have spent.
Yeah, like the level of guilt you feel, especially, and I will say it really subsides with the second one. You're like way less, but yeah, no, I remember that. I remember that completely. But even still, like I'm not, I haven't done an open mic since our kid was born. Like I've done a bunch of comedy shows, but they're all paid shows and worth my time. Or they're like I lost a contest yesterday. Like these are. By the way, I should have said this at the beginning. Not this Saturday, October 7th. Hold on. September 29th, this Friday, Mount Olympus Brewing, Bob Springer, Backwards Trevor, the most loyal listener of this podcast and every podcast I've done for a while, has stage 4 esophageal cancer, by the way, which we talked about this.
Yeah.
I think by the last time we podcasted, I think I was like, yeah, he's going through some shit, and I was being vague because they weren't public about it, and now it's like, not only has it progressed, but so... Great comedy fans, great folks. It's every dollar made on this show, none of it goes to the comedians. It all goes to help the Springers with Bob's medical bills. And we're doing a thing at the end of it, by the way. If you're a person who listens to this podcast, you might enjoy. It's like a comedy dunk tank, is what I'm calling it. Donate some money. It's like a comedy. It's like a dueling piano bar. You put money up with how you want us to roast whoever. We could roast each other. We could roast you. You could roast us. We could ruin the life of the person you brought to the show. Whatever you want.
That sounds a lot better than you shouldn't bill it as a dueling piano bar because those can be really annoying. This sounds better than that.
Yeah, I just mean the format. Request system is the same. Yeah,
right.
Like
I get it.
We're gonna do the highest donation first and the least stupid recommendation after that. And actually, if you want, I'm gonna try to film it. Also, NM Springer on Venmo is Bob's wife. If you want to send, also, by the way, this dude that's got cancer is not immune from being roasted. I will roast him. He had us put together. I mean, he didn't have us. A bunch of comics volunteered to do it. A roast video roasting him and his wife and his family and his cancer and all that. So,
really quick, if you yourself ever get a very serious illness, please invite me to your roast. I want to.
We could do that.
I have some material I'd like to try out. That'd be great.
Right. I might not have to be on the doorstep of death to make this happen.
No, that makes it better.
Yeah, that's good. Make that be the last thing that someone. I also think, by the way, what seems to be unfortunate is that I think becoming the person that tracks our home run game causes cancer. It turns out that's very upsetting.
We're gonna have to take this burden on ourselves, I think. But seriously though, this is a really tough thing to deal with, man.
Oh yeah,
and it's we don't have very many loyal listeners.
We can't afford to lose you, Bob.
You cannot afford to lose you. We'll figure the stats part of the home run game out, but we need you, man. The rest of you got to keep those numbers up.
Yeah. Also, October 7th, I'll be headlining Comedy/Bar in Capitol Hill, Seattle, which is a new comedy club up there. I have no idea who else is on the show, but it's actually my first time. I stepped foot in it 2 days before it opened because I needed to get some merch from the owner that I had left with him, and then I haven't been in there since, and they're like really doing well, I think. So comedy/bar.
Yeah.
I think it's comedy/bar.com, or if you look up comedy bar, comedy/bar on Facebook or whatever, it's Eventbrite. I think all their tickets are through Eventbrite, so you can figure it out. But come to that. Tell me that you came from this podcast, even if you hate my material, because I think most of the listeners probably have never seen me perform. If you hate my material, come tell me that you hated it and you came here because of the podcast.
And you'll get something special.
Yeah, a fucking punch in the mouth. Anyway, so it's been so long since we've talked about sports that the Mariners went from being like a fringe playoff contender to felt like a sure thing playoff team to now a team that is scrambling to try to maintain any hope for the playoffs. They had this run set up the last 10 games of the season. I believe it's 6 games versus Texas, 3 games versus Houston. 4 games versus Houston.
I think it's seven Texas
versus Texas, four against. And these are the 2 teams Houston, that they were most competitive with. They get swept in Texas, lose the first game to Houston. They finally won last night, which is I think beating Houston is that's their best shot of making the playoffs. And what has happened, Alex? First off, what has happened to the team, but also like, what do you think this means? Because the problem. One thing I will say as a data minded person is there's a chance this was an 85 win team no matter what, and it's just unfortunate that it occurs in this order, right? It's a sequencing. It's bad luck in sequencing.
Yeah. I mean, as we're recording this, we are on the precipice of the biggest game of the season for the Mariners. Their series finale against the Astros, which more or less will decide whether or not they get into the playoffs. Now, if they lose this game, their chances of getting in are slim, very slim. If they win this game, they're very high. It's rare that you find a game that is not the very last game of the season or a postseason game that has this much implication on whether you get in or not, right? So this is a very big game that they have coming up. But it's been a very weird season for the Mariners. The last couple of years, they have done this thing where they start very slow, and then around or slightly after the All-Star break, they really pick things up and they finish strong. It looked like they were on the verge of doing that again this year. They started kind of slow. July comes around, they start playing a lot better. August, they have the best month of baseball they've played ever as a franchise. Most wins that they've ever had in a month.
Which, by the way, includes the 2001 season where they were like tying records for most wins in April and stuff like that. Yeah,
where they were just steamrolling everybody. So, they have the best month of baseball they've ever had in August of this year. And you're thinking, okay, if this follows the format of the last 2 years, they're going to finish strong in September and they're going to just cruise right into the playoffs. They might even run away with the division the way that they're playing right now. And September has been terrible. It's just been really bad for the Mariners. And they've kind of regressed to their early season ways where it seems like they can't beat anybody, right? Mm-hmm. And they just doesn't matter who they're playing. They just can't beat anyone. But, I think what's happened in September is they've started to play some better teams with better records. Obviously, this gauntlet that they run here at the end of the year against the Western Division opponents that are also in the playoff race has made things quite interesting because they kind of control their own destiny in a way. But the Rangers and the Astros, who they're playing, probably feel the same way. They also control their own destiny. All you got to do is beat the opponent in front of you, and you're probably going to make the playoffs. If not win the division. So, as Major League Baseball, around Major League Baseball, the AL West has become like the focal point of the game right now because it's such a wild finish to the end, and these 3 teams are vying for a couple playoff spots that are still up in the air, and to the point that I think the Mariners have 2 or 3 nationally televised games just this week, which in a given season they might not have 2 or 3 nationally televised games. So to have a couple in a week is pretty cool. It shows that how big this AL West race is and how important these last few games are. But I think you're kind of right. You're on the right track with them being about an 85 win team, slightly above average. It's kind of where they were predicted to be. Odds makers kind of had them around that number at the beginning of the year. And that's kind of what they've lived up to. They've gotten lucky in that the Rangers and the Astros kind of faded of late. The Astros, especially for the last 2 months, have been not the Astros that we know. They've really kind of they've scuffled quite a bit. And then the Rangers, who started the year incredibly hot, they really faded in the last month until they started playing the Mariners again, and then became the best team in baseball once again. Yep. So all three of these teams have had kind of weird seasons that are maybe a little bit atypical of what you're used to seeing from them. But the Mariners still have a chance, man. We're down to the last few games of the regular season, and the Mariners still have a chance. And historically, that's better than most seasons. So I guess you got to take it.
Yeah. I mean, as we speak right now, maybe not as people are listening to this podcast, but as we speak right now, if the Mariners win out, they make the playoffs.
It's as simple as that. Yeah, if they go and they beat everybody in front of them, they're in. And, finishing against the Rangers, who just absolutely beat their ass last weekend with a 3-game sweep, is not ideal. The Rangers have the best lineup in baseball, and it shows. I mean, the Mariners have one of the best pitching staffs in baseball, and the Rangers seem to have no problem handling the Mariners pitching. And, the Rangers are kind of like, in a way, they're a perfect foil for the Mariners, because where the Mariners have been relatively cheap with their payroll and, kind of built around some homegrown talent, the Rangers have just spent frivolously and bought some of the best free agents money can buy, made some of the biggest acquisitions that you can make at the deadline. They've really, they've done exactly what you would want as a sports fan from your ownership group. And so they have two very contrasting styles, and yet they find themselves in basically the same position at the last week of the season. So it's really interesting to see how this will play out. I think most nihilistic Mariner fans like myself would say we're probably on the outside looking in because we didn't do things the right way leading up to this point, or we were too cheap, or we didn't make the moves we needed to when we needed to. But they have as good a chance as these other two teams right now, which is just wild to think about. I don't know if the Mariners do get in, I don't know if they're going to be able to kind of do much with it. It seems like, depending on how the playoff series line up, there is a really good chance that whoever gets that third wild card spot gets to play the worst division winner, which is Minnesota, who won the Central, and the Central has been bad this year. Minnesota is probably right on par with the Mariners as far as where they are in the wins and losses, and then kind of their overall talent. So getting a chance to be the third wild card team and play Minnesota could be a real benefit to whoever kind of sneaks into that last playoff spot. But it'll be interesting to see. I mean, everybody always says, if the Mariners can just get in, they're going to do some damage because they have better pitching than almost every team out there.
Sure.
But their pitching has sputtered a little bit down the stretch. Some of their starters have not been as dominant as we would expect. Their bullpen has been a little bit more inconsistent than usual. And we always know that with the Mariners, it's like their bats can go cold at a moment's notice. So you just don't know what you're going to get from this team on any given day. So we'll see what happens, man. It's exciting. It's always fun as a fan to just have something to care about in September, which, more seasons than not, as a Mariners fan, that is not the case. So it's great to see that they're at least making themselves relevant.
I'm going to provide a little bit of pushback on a couple things. Well, first off, playoff odds for the Mariners, according to Fangraphs, 48%, which it feels more dire than that, but because it lines up the way it does with the two division rivals, obviously they have an opportunity to make the playoffs. Basically, I think if they beat Houston and if they take 3 of 4 from Texas, I think that's pretty close to doing it, or maybe doesn't.
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing, I'll let you finish that point, but the interesting thing is if they win this game against Houston tonight, I think their playoff odds go up like 20 or 30%. It's crazy, right? Because if they beat Houston and win this series against Houston, in order to keep the Mariners out of the playoffs, in order to basically take the Mariners playoff spot, Houston would have to go and sweep the Diamondbacks in their last series, which is historically the Diamondbacks have not been very good, but the Diamondbacks right now are playing for a playoff spot themselves. So they actually have something to play for. They actually have reason to go out and compete, which is a luxury if you're a Mariner fan, because there's a lot of teams out there right now that would just roll over and die for a team that's competing for a playoff spot because they have nothing to play for. The Diamondbacks are still going to be very competitive in this series against Houston. So, Yeah, I can't really think of an instance where one single game that isn't the last game of the season has had this much implication on playoffs, but that's exactly the case tonight.
Yeah, I know the yesterday it was 29%, and then beating Houston brought it up to 48%, 48.6. I do think one thing I will say is that if they beat Houston today, they're still only one ahead in the loss column. So there is I think there's a little more potential for Houston because it also depends on what the Mariners do against Texas. But one other thing that I will say is you said a thing about Texas having the best lineup in baseball, and my pushback is the Atlanta Braves are fucking incredible this year.
The Braves are really good.
I'm going to give you some information about the Atlanta Braves that is surprising to me. I knew they were great. Since 2001, which is just when I ran the stats as we were talking, the Atlanta Braves have the best offense by WRC plus in baseball. The 2019 Houston Astros, trash cans and all, I think they're like one WRC plus point behind them, but a very good. I mean, not to say Texas doesn't have a great offense. They have one of the best offenses in baseball, but that Atlanta team, I think maybe because you and I aren't fans of a National League team, is historically incredible. And
I mean, Ronald Acuna is having one of the greatest top 5 seasons all time for an individual player. He's going to finish, he already has a 40-40 season, which is only the 5th 40-40 season ever, right? Mm-hmm. And then he's going to finish with 60 stolen bases or something like that. So it's even more than a 40-40 season. He's having one of the greatest seasons. He's if Julio Rodriguez was even better than he is. If you think Julio's good, go watch Ronald Acuna Jr. play. He is even better, more dynamic, and just having an incredible season. And then beyond that, I mean, usually when you find a player that good, think of a Mike Trout or something. It's a lot of times those guys are surrounded by a bunch of scrubs, but that's not the case with the Braves lineup. They've got Matt Olson, who I think leads the league in home runs. He might lead all of Major League Baseball in home runs. Playing first base for them, which I still can't believe that the A's, the A's always do the thing where they just trade their young good players who are going to hit free agency and cost a lot of money. They always trade them for a boatload of prospects. It didn't work out this time. Matt Olson is going to outdo whatever those prospects do. He's been so good for them. And then they got Austin Riley, who's had a great year as a third baseman at a position where third base has become kind of a black hole around baseball. There's just not a lot of good third basemen anymore, and Austin Riley is one of the premier third basemen still. And then on top of that, I mean, they have great pitching to go along with this core of players that can carry any lineup and a bunch of guys that can fill out that lineup too. So I would have to imagine, I know in the past couple of years, the Dodgers have always been mentioned as a front runner for, winning the World Series, or, some of these AL juggernaut teams like Houston, for example, have always been up there. I would be shocked if the Braves did not at least make the World Series. And if they get there, I would be shocked if they didn't win. They're really that good this year.
Yeah. So Fangraphs playoff odds has win the World Series as part of it. And, so the Braves are 24% to win the World Series, which every other team, obviously. I think the Dodgers are in double digits. Yeah, Dodgers are 15%, and then it's there's no AL team. There's no AL team that's in double digits, which, I mean, first off, the AL is very competitive, and the AL West is fraught with maybe the best team in the AL won't make the playoffs, or the AL West won't make the playoffs. Do we agree on talent? Probably Seattle's the third best team in the AL West.
In the AL West specifically, I don't know. I think from an offensive lineup talent, I mean, they're down there. They might even be worse than the Angels if you just think about their offense. But when you factor in the pitching, I mean, Seattle's pitching is much better than Texas. I mean, part of the reason Texas really faltered in the last month was because of their pitching. Their starters really regressed, and granted, they've had some injuries. Jacob deGrom's been out for pretty much all year. Yeah. They acquire Max Scherzer at the deadline, and then he gets injured a couple weeks ago, so he's out. So they've had some injuries that have really hurt their rotation. But even some of the guys, they acquired Andrew Heaney, who was traditionally one of the better pitchers for the Angels over the past few years. They brought him in this season, and he's struggled to the point that they've moved him to the bullpen. So even some of the guys that they have had healthy have not really performed the way that they'd expect. And then their bullpen has been kind of a disaster. They acquired Aroldis Chapman to be their closer at the deadline. You know, traditionally a pretty good closer, but he's getting up there and he can be erratic, and he hasn't solidified that bullpen, I think, the way that they thought. And prior to getting Chapman, they didn't really have a true closer in their pen at all. So they've kind of been trying to like piece it together from a pitching perspective, where the Mariners are pretty solid on the pitching front. And I would even say against, you know, Houston's had a lot of injuries to their pitching too, and a lot of guys in their bullpen that have struggled as well. So it's hard to kind of like say they're maybe the third best overall talent, because I think the Mariners pitching just kind of so outweighs Houston and Texas, but their lineup is so much worse. I mean, their lineup is just so much worse than these other two teams that it, you know, on any given night, it's why you see them, you know, one night they'll put up 8 runs and then the next night they'll get shut out. And it's just so baffling and frustrating if you're a Mariners fan to watch this night in and night out, because there's hardly any consistency. You know, if you're a Rangers fan, you can count on 5 runs a night pretty much from your team. And it's just a matter of, will the pitching hold up or not? Mm-hmm. And Houston has traditionally been good on both ends, so you kind of know what you're going to get with them. But with the Mariners, man, it is just one night, it's like when they hit in bunches and the entire lineup produces. And when, you know, their top couple guys don't produce, the whole lineup goes cold. And so it's just, that's the most frustrating part about this team, man.
Yeah. Well, that's unfortunately, that's even dating back to 2001, that team wasn't an offensive juggernaut. It was, you know, just like a bunch of role players having career years, Ichiro like changing baseball basically. Yeah. And like reviving the leadoff hitter pretty much. Like I think we had started to head towards where I think we're kind of headed back there now, but like the power hitter in the leadoff spot thing a little bit more. Yeah. And Ichiro almost like it feels like single-handedly brought back the slap hitting super fast leadoff hitter. And but yeah, it'll be interesting to watch. Well, I'm sure next week, if we do a podcast next week, which is a big if. Every week could be our last podcast, folks. So you better enjoy them while you get them, because you might not get them ever after this. This could be the last podcast we do. We're almost certainly, by the way, going to have some gaps in our, you know, going forward. This is not a return, I don't think, to the full slate of podcasts. And eventually, once Alex's kid is 7 years old, we might get back into the, you know, in person. But by the way, I think that feels like it's a million years away right now. I got to imagine for you.
Yeah, I like it here.
You say you like it here?
I like it here. Yeah. No, yeah. I've even like, yeah. I don't mind going to your. We don't even live that far apart from one another. I mean,
no, it's not. Which is, I'm not. It's just because you got this child at your house.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, I'm just saying.
And because my garage is a mess still, this place that was supposed to be the podcast. I'm using you as the delay when I'm also delaying it silently. Yeah.
It's good. I always have a barrel of excuses ready for any situation. So
absolutely,
that's how you got to live life.
So the other thing we've seen the rise and fall and plateau of the Mariners. We've also seen, in the entire time that you've been gone, we've seen the rise and fall of the hype of the prime era at Colorado, which we talked a lot about Dion before the season. I think not a lot, but we talked a little bit about the Colorado program and the excitement around the program. I don't remember what our opinions were. I find the whole thing very fun. It's I understand why people might not like it. I also found it. I actually meant to check this. I got to find when yesterday or last week I took a screenshot of the ticket prices for Colorado games for the next home game. Yeah, it was like $320, and I want to see how much. I'll try to find it while we're talking, but I want to see how much it dropped with just one loss, because so they play the first 2 games, and they have the game against Colorado State, which is not an opponent that they should have had be that close, but they win this exciting, close overtime game against Colorado State, and then they go to Oregon, and I like the first, I think, big test of the prime era, and they get absolutely just the doors blown off of them.
Yeah, it's interesting because their first game of the year, Colorado's first game of the year, they're playing TCU at TCU, and TCU was in the championship last year, so they're coming off a big season. They were ranked in the teens at the time, but no one's really sure how good TCU really is. And they go out and they beat TCU, and that day we were actually in the hospital, post delivery. So I watched that whole game because there was nothing to do. So
right.
That game was on TV. I'm just sitting there holding a baby watching Colorado play TCU and look really, really good against them. And anyone who watched that game would be excited about Colorado and its prospects going forward. But I think part of that is just we just did not know how good or how bad TCU was. We were basing everything we knew about them off last season when they were very good. Where Colorado last season was very bad. And then, yeah, you're right. They go play Colorado State, and they were favored by, I think Colorado was favored by about 23 or 24, depending on, where you placed your bet. And they end up going to overtime and winning a thriller that should never have been a thriller. Colorado State team had 50 points put up on them by Wazoo just the week prior. And now we know that Wazoo is actually pretty good. They're pretty good. But even still, another Pac-12 team put up 50 on Colorado State, and they looked horrible against Washington State. And Colorado had a lot of trouble beating them. And, I mean, that week leading up to that game, that Colorado State game, which is, they're not in the same conference anymore, but they do still have a rivalry. The Colorado State coach pops off and makes some comments about Deion Sanders that are less than flattering. So he gives Colorado all this ammunition to get even more amped about a game that they should already be hyped up for. And still, Colorado struggles. And then you're right. They go into Oregon the following week, and Oregon just waxes them. And I'm not like they were going to lose that game at Oregon no matter what, but they were also without probably their best player in Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter, if you haven't seen him play, I call him the Shohei Ohtani of college football because he is a true two-way player in today's college football game, which does not happen very often. There's been a few two-way players in the past generation. But usually they're like, he's a fullback and a linebacker or a fullback and a defensive end. And you're like, all right, he's not touching the ball that much. Travis Hunter is.
A lot of times it's also a guy who's like, yeah, we have a couple packages.
Right.
For him, you know what I mean?
Packages, or he's like, he's a good player, but he's not like the most impactful player on the football field, right? Like usually those two-way guys are kind of like, he's like a decent player. He'll be like a third-day pick in the NFL draft one day. Travis Hunter is one of the best players in college football, period. He's a receiver and a cornerback. And a lot of, Deion Sanders was that back in the day. He played some receiver and cornerback, but he played cornerback at an elite level, and he played wide receiver sparingly at an okay level. Yeah. Travis Hunter plays both positions at an elite level. And he plays like every single snap. That first game against TCU, it's 100 degrees there in Texas, and he played like every single snap. That's insane. Your body should just cave in on itself in that heat, playing that much, running around, and he looked great. And so then in that game against Colorado State, he absorbs a dirty hit from a Colorado State player, a late hit, that ends up sending him to the hospital with like a kidney laceration or something like that. Yeah. And not ideal to lose your best player, especially going into a big game against Oregon. That dude wasn't going to make up 45 points or whatever they ended up losing by to Oregon. Right. But not having their best player for a few weeks is probably going to hurt them, in addition to all the other things that have proven that they're a human team. I like Deion too. I actually find I've never had it. I think it's somewhat generational. I think people who are your and my age don't seem to mind Deion Sanders, because when Deion was being perceived as like an asshole, when he was in his prime, no pun intended, I know, good one, pun intended, actually, I take that back. When he was in his prime in the 90s, we were kids, so everything he was doing to us was just fun. All the flash, him being bombastic, that didn't bother us because we're kids. But like the generation above us hated that guy, and the generation above us still hates that guy as a coach. But I don't feel like there's too many people our age who are like that put off by what Deion Sanders' whole shtick.
Yeah, I think that the thing that is refreshing about him is very often you'll hear every football coach is like the governor of a small state almost. Like they're all politicians. They're all answering in these like obvious non-answers, these obvious, they're ducking questions left and right. It's like, they're constantly deflecting these questions, and he answers it honestly, and it seems like he lets his players be honest too, where he's like, yes, it's personal. Yes, I'm pissed. You know, we've lived through an entire era of Pete Carroll saying like, no, I don't care that it's New England. Like, that doesn't matter to me. When obviously it does. And he's actually started to say that a little bit recently. But I even think Pete's maybe a little more open than the average football coach, the average high-level football coach. And it's like, I think to a degree, actually, Prime, Dion he's doing a little bit of what Pete Carroll did in Seattle, which he comes in and allows these guys to be human beings, to be true to themselves, to go out and have fun playing football, right? And I think that's like very infectious. Obviously, there was a mass migration to Colorado when he went there, and he also sent a bunch of people away, which is very Pete Carroll-esque when he came to Seattle. And I don't know, I mean, I think Pete Carroll was like the ideal college football coach, because it does seem like Pete Carroll, at some point when he's got to make a tough decision and cut a guy, that person feels betrayed because of how close they felt to Pete along the way. Yeah. In college, there's this natural cycle of players that you don't have to worry about. I don't know if Coach Prime I don't think he's going to be in Colorado for very long, by the way. I think that's a pretty popular opinion.
No, I think he'll be there for as long as his kids are in college, and then he'll take.
But even with the transfer portal, that almost doesn't matter either. I mean, Shadour's probably gone after this year. He's probably a first-round pick this year. How old is the other kid? I don't even remember.
I don't know. But Dion did this thing where he ranked his kids. Did you see where he ranked his kids on Twitter? Great. So he doesn't care either.
Yeah. But I mean, he's a guy who like probably could have just about any college job he wants. He's a Florida State. Was he a Florida State guy?
But Florida State's doing all right now, so it doesn't seem like they'll have any reason to part with their current head coach. But I think if they ever do make a move, that would be Dion's desired landing spot. I would have to think. Yeah, that's his alma mater.
Yeah, it's his alma mater. I don't know where he lives now, but I mean, you got to imagine. I think that there's a very good chance that if he has success like this, and so much of college football isn't like this X's and O's game where you're like trying to out-strategize people. It's the place where you can win on just having so much more talent than everybody else. Nick Saban,
absolutely.
Maybe as an X's and O's guy, it obviously didn't work incredibly well in the NFL, but that dude gets his recruiting classes. It's like, fuck, he's got like the top 5 running backs, or like,
it's a testament to him because like, you think about like the geography of some places, like Tuscaloosa, Alabama is not a destination for people, right. I'm sure there's a lot of nice things about it, but it's not like you're not taking your vacations there. So people aren't going there for the geography. And if geography were to play a role or factors like that, then everyone would be going to Arizona State or something like that, to play their college ball. And that they clearly struggle. So yeah, it is a testament to the coaching staff to be able to go and get those players. I think, the Dion thing is so fascinating because even just in the last couple of weeks, you've seen like this becomes like a racial issue. It's become like a class issue. College football is so polarizing because unlike some other sports, I mean, there's so many fans that are like tied to the old ways of doing things. And in the last couple of years, it has accelerated the change in college football more than maybe any other sport. MLB made some changes this year that changed the sport, but purists, I feel like, have more or less calmed down and been able to live with those. The changes, like with NIL in college sports, I don't know if purists are ever going to be able to embrace those. I mean, you still hear like older white dudes get all up in arms about NIL, but where Dion has capitalized is in making NIL work for him, and other schools have done it too. Washington is a great example of a school that has capitalized on NIL. They brought back all these dudes that should have been first or second round draft picks, and they brought them back to play another year here because they were able to guarantee them more money than they would have got on a rookie contract in the NFL for a year. And at the same time, continue to promise that they would develop them as players. And they're ranked 7th in the nation right now because of that. Yeah. They don't get the same set of eyes on them that Dion gets on Colorado because Dion does it in a way that is abrasive to people, that rubs people the wrong way.
Dion comes in with like there's intrigue about him as a person because he's been an interesting person in the spotlight for 30 plus years now, where Kalen DeBoer is not like, that's not an exciting person at all, right? Like, that's
nice guy. Like, seems like a good coach, but yeah, not exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm like incredibly happy. By the way, not thrilled with the hire, and I'm like, could not be more happy with the results. And I think like the process seems good, and it's like modernizing Washington football, where I feel like they were trying to be USC forever and run these like pro style under center offenses, and now it's like
running the ball.
Just like let's put up Texas Tech numbers and fucking have a good team. And by the way, like the NFL's turning into that too. It's all we're several times through this cycle where an offensive style becomes popular in college and then makes it to the NFL, and it's becomes the new thing. And then the way it's all like Washington trying to stick to this, like, it was always frustrating to me trying to stick to this like pro style thing. This like kind of vestige of the 80s bothered me. But I think, like,
college sports as a whole, just they hold on to the past and the traditions so much. Like, you see it in basketball, like Big Ten basketball, most boring brand of basketball to watch. Slow down. It's watching like a basketball game from the 1950s. It looks nothing like the NBA. Football is the same way. You have such a variety of offenses and defenses, across college football, where you have some teams that are like, we're going to be like Army and just run the ball like it's 1940 over and over and over again. And then you have other teams that are like, we're going to try to be like the best NFL offenses out there and just sling the ball all over the place. And, there's different ways of doing things, but college, just the fans of college sports in general do not seem to embrace change very well. And I think that's where, Deion is he's like a pro, more like an NFL guy in the college game. And that alone can be a problem. But then when you factor in his personality, there is reason to dislike him. Even if you like him, any logical person could look at Deion's past and say, I understand why people could dislike him. There are a lot of things that could be problematic about Deion. But in general, he's been an okay person. Like, you can look at any college coach or anyone involved in athletics and find something in their past that is problematic. The problems that have made Deion problematic pale in comparison to a lot of other coaches out there. So if you really, really don't like him, it might be more of a you thing than a him thing. It's not like this guy's out there committing crimes or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the race component's going to be a part of it forever. And he's going to be, I think it's just like, we're talking about the stuffiest, most traditionalist fans. And I think also one thing about it, I will say, is like, you got an HBCU coach, a bunch of HBCU players. The amount of black coaches in college football that have had, a long run is like very small, and it's like criminal that it's been as there's been so few of them. And I think like Deion is going to end up being very important for college football in a whole bunch of ways, and also piss a bunch of people off, which I guess our generation doesn't mind as much. I think it's fun. I will say this because you got a child to get back to. I'm trying to respect your 90-minute request, which is I genuinely am, because I want to keep doing these podcasts, and the more we can keep your wife happy.
We're usually close to that regardless.
Ish. Tickets for Colorado home games, when I took the screenshot, I believe it was like $321 was the cheapest ticket. Yeah. Right now, $168. That to me felt like a thing where it was going to take the momentum away a little bit from this like celebrity thing where like The Rock and Lil Wayne are showing up at games out of nowhere. These guys who, you could not be a bigger front runner than someone who's suddenly a Colorado Buffaloes fan.
Well, look, just the fact that Deion was able to get those types of dudes out there, like, I don't know, I've been to Boulder, Colorado. It's like 45 minutes outside of Denver, so it's like, it's enough that it's not like it's LA where it's easy to just get those types of people to come out to your games. Like, you're gonna have to go to the Denver airport and then drive a little ways to get out there, and it's a true college town where there's nothing else in the town besides the college and then like the businesses that are supported by the college. So, it's not the easiest place to get to, and Deion he's made people pay attention to Boulder, Colorado, and to a football team that had a 1 win last year, and that hasn't been relevant in like 30 or 40 years. Like, that's really, that by itself is impressive. Now, I was looking at their schedule, and if things go the way that they went last week against Oregon, they might only have like a couple more wins in the chamber, and it might be one of those things where they are like 6-6 and barely sneak into like the worst bowl game that you can get into. So for as promising as it started, I think they're going to come down to earth the rest of the way. And that's probably like, that in and of itself is an accomplishment. To take a 1-win team and turn them into a bowl eligible team in a single year is remarkable. Most teams don't do that. So if he can do that in his first year, I think that's a promising sign. But like you said earlier, ultimately, he's probably not long for that place. So what does it really mean in the long run? I think Colorado hiring him was just like, hey, we understand the risks here. We just need to refresh the image of this program. And even in just a couple games, in just 1 month, they've already done that. So I think it's been worth it. You know, even if he doesn't stay for more than a couple years.
Set an over-under that you'd be willing to take the under at on Colorado wins at the end of the season, bowl game included. And then we should wager.
Bowl game included? I would say the only number I'd be comfortable at would be like 8.5. I think
under,
that I think
under 8.5.
I think they're gonna have 6 or 7 regular season wins at most, and then if they win the bowl game,
you get 8 and up, or 8 and down. I get 9 and up.
Yes.
All right. We'll figure out the stakes later because we're running out of time a little bit. Because I want to briefly talk about this Damian Lillard trade also. Did you see it?
What about T Swift and Travis Kelce?
Oh fuck! See, this is what I'm saying.
We have to talk about it. We'll talk about it really quick. What did you think? What do you think about it? Wait, let me preface it by saying this. I had a buddy the other day ask the question, and I think it's a valid question: is Taylor Swift the most recognizable human being on earth right now?
Absolutely not. It's Donald Trump.
I don't know if it's Trump, but I don't think it's Taylor Swift either.
Yeah,
I do think it's an argumentative question. It's a fair question. I think among white women, yes. Yes, sure. Among white women, she is probably the most recognized. She is what Oprah was 20 years ago. Oprah 20 years ago, when she's giving away all the free stuff, when anything she says she likes immediately flies off the shelves of wherever it is, that was like the height of fame. Or Jordan in the 90s is another example. Like the height of fame, anything they touch.
We got to bring this show down to 60 minutes and do it twice a week because this is too hot of a topic to really, we're just not going to give it its due respect. I have a friend that told me, he goes, this is not necessarily the kind of podcast we want to have, but he goes, I don't get it. Taylor Swift is a 6. Like attractive. I'm like, you're crazy. Do you remember
the episode of The Office where they have the office debate on whether Hillary Swank is hot or not?
Yes.
The entire office is divided. They're divided right down the middle. It's like 6-6 or something. And the entire episode is trying to convince the other side that she is either hot or not hot. Taylor Swift is like squarely in that argument, I feel like.
But no, but she's not. She's only in that for people who want to be contrarians. Like this dude, by the way.
But I feel like that's how it was with like any celebrity is they're hot. Like they're just way better looking than
Hillary
you or I.
Swank was not leading an army of women and gay men across the country. Like this like Taylor Swift, this idea is like, it's like it's like when a band gets popular and once they get popular, no one ever liked them. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like that shit always annoys me. And it's like that, except for she's got an army of fucking essentially like women and gay men who are Opie and Anthony fan level of trolls that will ruin your life. If you, the lady's very attractive. By the way, Travis Kelce, new level of appreciation for how attractive he is because I've been seeing him a lot more.
He's the most. Travis Kelce might be the most. He might be the most polarizing person on earth this week because half of Taylor Swift fans are like, "Don't be with this guy who we know nothing about," and the other half are like, "I love it. I love it. It's perfect." Yeah. I think Travis Kelce, as far as like popular NFL football players go, is like the most innocent of the popular football players. Like, you might find his antics goofy sometimes, but he's just goofy. That's the extent of it. It's not like it's annoying or polarizing in any way. He's just kind of like a silly guy that he's not even like Gronkowski level goofy. Who Gronkowski is like, his whole shtick is that he's a dummy, right? And he probably is not as much of a dummy as he portrays himself as. Travis Kelce isn't even portraying himself as a dummy. He's just kind of a goofball, and I actually find him somewhat likable. On a team that really isn't that likable anymore.
Yeah. I don't find him particularly offensive. I mean, who was the dude? Was it Babyface that was at the Super Bowl? I have a tweet that I felt went underappreciated by the world. Was it Babyface?
I don't remember.
Hold on.
Performing or just like at the game? It was
Babyface, and I remember tweeting. It was Chris Stapleton and Babyface, and I said, I'm going to tell my kids this is the Kelce brothers, which because you see those two and you're like, how could they possibly have been raised by the same parents and turn out this different from each other? Yeah, but also like still obviously get along very well.
Yeah, you know? They have very different body types. Very different body types.
I mean, like Travis Kelce looks like a guy who, was like a white rapper. And Jason Kelce looks like he hates white rappers and black rappers and rappers of all types.
Jason Kelce looks like he goes to all the country concerts, and Travis Kelce looks like he goes to Summer Jam every year.
Yeah, and performs.
They're just on two different ends of the spectrum, but it works out for them. That in and of itself is fascinating. I almost want to go and watch the Kelce documentary that's on.
I know,
I think it's on Amazon Prime.
They keep trying to make us watch it.
It's like, how did this family produce two brothers who, in a lot of ways, are very similar because they have the exact same profession and are very good at it, but in a lot of ways, at least look completely the opposite of each other. Yeah. How did this happen? It's fascinating.
We haven't seen something this different since the Dolezal family.
I don't know what the rest of her family was like, but I know what she was like.
A bunch of white people from Wisconsin, I believe.
Okay, yeah. That makes sense then. All right. We don't have to talk anymore about Taylor Swift and Travis. All the best to them. That's all.
Yeah, good. Say. I mean, fine. I don't whatever. I don't have like strong
and RIP to him if they break up. My God. She'll have an entire album about football.
What I will say, it was like a tough age realization to realize. I was like, oh shit, like this younger lady is dating someone who is like almost at the end of their NFL career that's only 33 years old. That was one point in the, oh fuck, I'm old. I was like, he's only 33 years old. And then also I go, oh shit, Taylor Swift is 33 years old. Like, that's insane.
She's been in our consciousness for a long time now, it turns out. Yeah.
I know. So the Dame Lillard trade, I just want to talk about the fact that it happened, and also I think like in a different era, all I've seen is criticism of the trade, and I think it's like, for me, this kind of trade is impossible to criticize on, like, because we don't know what else was out there. This might be the best offer, that the best option that Portland had to move on from Dame Lillard. We don't know what the other options were. I think we kind of know that they had to do it. Like, they were going to have to move on from him at some point. But the thing that's interesting to me is DeAndre Ayton is in that trade. And he's like a guy who's
must be a bad day for DeAndre Ayton. Got to be a bad day.
Well, yeah, but in a different era of basketball, this trade would be like, you could almost, I mean, obviously, like, salaries have to match up. You could almost go 1-for-1 in that situation, like an aging star, but a young, like, kind of true old school center, compared to like the modern 6'8" dribble and shoot centers that we have.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, DeAndre Ayton's, outside of Lillard, probably the best player in this entire package. It's a huge trade. It's a 3-team trade.
Yeah.
And it's just like, in a lot of ways, when I first saw this trade break, and, up till this point, Damian Lillard has been kind of like hinting that he wants to be out of Portland if they're not committed to winning. It never feels like Portland is actually committed to winning. Even the years they go for it and have a good playoff run, it never feels like they're really set up. It's like if the Mariners get into the playoffs, you're like, they have all these deficiencies, yet here they are. That's kind of how Portland is, right? So Ayton's kind of probably the best player that Portland's getting in return. They're getting like a first-round pick, which almost means nothing in the NBA these days, and then a bunch of other guys.
Well, it's a 2029 first-round pick also.
Damian Lillard will be dead at that point. It'll be so far in the future.
Of old age, of natural causes.
Of old age, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's in a lot of ways, when I first saw this trade, it reminded me of the Russell Wilson trade, which in some ways is funny because Jody Allen owns the Blazers as she owns the Seahawks. And now she has overseen these two very big trades, which we know the Russell Wilson trade worked out great for the Seahawks. But at the time, it was more or less panned by everybody. Everyone thought it was a bad deal for the Seahawks. Seahawks weren't getting enough in return for a franchise quarterback. And that's kind of, I think, the initial reaction to the Dame Lillard trade is that the Blazers are not getting enough back for, an elite basketball player in the NBA. And these days, man, anytime you're right, in a different era, elite basketball players were not nearly as valued as they are now. I mean, you could have had a situation where Dame was traded just for a guy like Ayton and maybe a pick. But now it's like, if you have an elite guy, I'm always like shocked by the amount of value that a guy like James Harden commands, right? Which, no doubt about it, he's an elite player in the NBA, but he's also seems to be like a cancer wherever he goes. He's everywhere he goes, the team doesn't really have success, and yet everyone still wants him and is willing to give up a king's ransom for him, it seems like. And so that's kind of how the NBA has shifted. If you have one of these guys who's like a top 20 player in the league, you should be getting like an entire team's worth of players back in return, it feels like. And so if you don't do that, as is the case with Lillard, then everyone's going to say the trade was bad. But we don't really know. I mean, Lillard is 33. He's proven to be a good player up to this point. But you know what? Russell Wilson was about the same age and had a very similar lineage up to that point as well, except he also had a championship in his back pocket, which, fair or unfair to Lillard, he's never won a championship. And you can say that might be because Portland didn't invest in people around him, but he also didn't lead them there. So that's on him, man. And I like Damian Lillard, but the fact is he just doesn't have one, right? Now he's going to a team that has recently won a championship, that has another superstar in Giannis, that has a good supporting cast that should be able to kind of, they're going to be an immediate contender and probably one of the favorites to go win the title this year. But you just never know, man. You just never know with these types of trades. And who knows? Maybe the package Portland got back in return turns out to form a nucleus, or at least give them something to build around and have a future where they might not have had a future with Damian Lillard. Maybe they weren't going to spend the money around him, or maybe it was just simply a matter of there wasn't enough time left in his career to be able to build that winner. Now maybe they have a chance to do that. Who knows?
Yeah. I do think he's a decent fit, like a little bit of a this is like a I'm going to acknowledge that this isn't a perfect analogy right now, but a little bit of a Stockton and Malone fit where he's like, a penetrating guard with a guy who can also score inside and then with complementary pieces. You see these teams sometimes that have all these slashing small forwards and then don't have guys that can shoot from the outside, and you just need diversity in scoring. And I do think he provides. He's like, I've always thought, like when it was Russell Westbrook and James Harden, it felt like and Kevin Durant, it felt like too much redundancy to me.
Yeah,
and in this
I agree.
Case,
I mean, the NBA
feels
mantra,
like there's some diversity in scoring.
The way to do things in the NBA now, it's like you just load up on scores and you worry about the rest later. But we've seen plenty of examples in recent years where adding that extra piece, that extra score that's supposed to put you over the top, ends up being a detriment to the team because now there's just not enough basketballs to go around. And it'll be interesting to see how Dame fits in with Giannis, with Chris Middleton, with these guys who've proven that they can score, especially a big-time proven scorer like Giannis. He's going to have to – I would have to imagine that Dame's ability to score will go down a little bit just because he'll have to be responsible for distributing these guys, where in Portland he really had nobody to distribute to most of the time. There was always like one or two other guys that could maybe put the ball in the basket to a slight degree, but he never really had any other stars around him. So to actually play with true stars, not just like decent players, but true stars, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out because there's no guarantee it's going to be perfectly smooth. I'm not saying it won't be, but there's just no guarantee that it's going to work out the way everyone thinks because we've seen plenty of times before where it hasn't worked out.
Yeah. I think if we see him maintain his points per game or, see a less than expected reduction, I think he'll probably be a more efficient scorer because he's not the focal point of the other team's defense constantly.
For sure.
Right, we got to play the home run
long
game.
Threes,
you got to go feed a child.
Really quick. Those long threes he hits in Portland, man, they're going to be he'll be even more open for those now. Home run game. I've got a guy for you. I feel like in some ways he kind of fits the mold. He's like fits the mold of Dion in a way where he's a little bit abrasive. Although I would say this guy is probably more of an asshole. 90s player, not super grid player in the 90s. The player is Albert Bell.
Oh, Albert Bell.
Yes, Albert Bell. And I will give you nothing else. From here, you are on your own.
Yeah, I can't remember even where our rules landed. We're no career and no, just nothing, no information. I have to give you
straight up. Here's the name of the player. Anything I give you from that point forward is a bonus.
Hey, Albert Bell was part of that Cleveland team that just seemed like they were just churning out stars. Like they would. I mean, Carlos Baerga looked like a star there. I think. My memory always brings Juan Gonzalez there at some point, but maybe he wasn't there.
He went to Cleveland eventually, but it was later. It was later, right after that.
Albert Bell ends up, I want to say, playing with like the Orioles and White Sox also. But his big asshole moment, if I remember, is he was like rounding second base or something, and who was the other player that he?
It was a former Mariner. He was running from first to second. There's a ground ball kind of between the two bags. Second baseman for the Brewers goes to field it, and he's a little guy, Fernando Vina. And Albert Bell uses all 225-ish pounds of his muscular frame to blow this dude up and send him flying. If you've never seen the video, which I'm sure most people have, but if you've never seen the video, go look up Albert Bell, Fernando Vina, because it's a dick move what he did, but it is kind of funny to watch. I mean,
yeah. So, I mean, I also remember Albert Bell being just like, kind of like, Manny Ramirez comes from those Cleveland teams too. Yeah. And I remember that duo just seemed like an unstoppable two guys that probably should not be playing outfield, by the way, but like maybe early Manny wasn't so bad, but Bell in particular. But I remember those guys they're just offensive juggernauts that those Cleveland teams were so interesting. And those were like, I believe Mike Hargrove coached. Yeah. Was Eric Wedge in Cleveland?
Eric Wedge was in Cleveland later on, like in the early 2000s.
And Cleveland coaches, I tell you.
They loved the pipeline. Yep.
Where did Wakamatsu come from?
God, I think he was directly from Texas as like their bench coach. No, maybe that's where he went later. I can't remember exactly. He kind of bounced around.
Yeah. All right. So Royals, I'm going to say, I think Albert Bell probably played 13 seasons. I think he probably had a contract that kept him around longer than he probably deserved. My suspicion is he came up pretty early and was good pretty quickly. And I want to say, so it's also like mid-90s baseball. So much of his success is pre-98, pre-steroid era, where we would appreciate a 35 home run season as a legit power hitter. I'm going to say, this is, I don't know, it's tough because it's the career length that I think. I'm going to say 405 home runs.
Okay, let me write that down.
I think I fucked myself because I feel like that's got to be too high.
I like to do the results compliment sandwich style. Tell you where you did good, then bad, then good.
It's going to be thin bread on this one, baby.
Well, you almost nailed the years. He played 12 seasons. You said 13, so you were dead on. You said he came up young and got good fast. Kind of true. He came up in 89 for 62 games. In 1990, he only plays 9 games. I'm guessing maybe he got injured or something. And then in 91, his career really takes off. He's only 24 years old when that happens. So he more or less becomes a regular in 91.
I fucked myself on the process. I can already feel it. I'm rusty.
No. And then I'd say you were okay. And then 93
Can I make a second guess before we go? I want to
go ahead. Make a second guess.
I'm going to say 302 home runs. Anyways, okay.
Let me write that down, even though it doesn't count.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So 93 through 97, he makes the All-Star team every single year. He's in his prime, age 26 to 30. You'll also notice around this time, his frame gets much bigger.
Yes.
Might be a coincidence. I don't know. He finishes top 10 in MVP voting in like 4 straight years. 95, he was a beast. That was the year the Cleveland took out the Mariners in the playoffs in the ALCS. Yeah. And yeah, you were right. I mean, his teammates that year, he's got Manny there. He's got Baerga. Robbie Alomar's there at some point. I can't remember if they overlap at all, him and Baerga. Omar Vizquel is their shortstop. Jim Tomey's at first. I mean, they've got like superstars at every single position.
I think Jim Thome might have been at third base at that point.
Yeah, he might still have been their third baseman. You might be right. And I think, yeah, you're right, because Paul Sereno was playing first, and then we eventually got right. Sereno the next year.
Do we have a Sandy Alomar? Was he ever in Cleveland?
Yeah, he was their catcher. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, they had a really
Kenny
good
Lofton
team
in center, maybe.
Yep. Yeah, just dominant.
What a fucking team.
Names at every single position. Yeah, the fact that they didn't win with that team. You know, they end up losing to the Braves, I think, in the World Series, in the battle of two names that will eventually be erased from history. Two team mascots that can't exist any longer. But yeah, so anyway, 95, he had a great season in 95. He actually had 50 home runs, which I think led the league. He was really good. He had some really, really good years there. I'm just going to give you the number because you actually did a really good job with this one. He had 381 home runs. You were only off by 24. You were much farther off on your second guess that didn't count. I should have offered you the opportunity to have it count.
Double or nothing.
Double or
nothing.
That
feels good. I didn't realize he had the big 50-plus home run season. I guess just because those seemed so rare back then. What year did you say that was?
That was 95. So 95 ends up being like really probably his best season. 96 is his last year.
Shortened season, right? Because that's
yes, it started late. Yeah, it started late in the year after the strike. 96 is his last year in Cleveland when he's 29 years old. 97 he goes to the White Sox, so he plays 2 seasons with the White Sox, and then he finishes his career with 2 seasons in Baltimore. His numbers were actually really good until the end. His second to last year, he had 37 home runs. His 2 years in Chicago, he had 30 and 49 home runs. He played in 98. He plays every single game of the season, and then somehow an extra one. He plays 163 games. So they must have had like a 1-game playoff or something to decide, postseason eligibility. So he plays. He's reliable. He's more or less stays pretty healthy throughout his career. Puts up big numbers. He's fast. He had 17 stolen bases in his second to last year. So he's fast, big, hits the ball hard. I mean, if he played in today's game, people would probably compare him to somebody like Mike Trout. But back in the 90s, there were so many guys that were like him that he kind of got overlooked. And then on top of that, he was an asshole. So no one ever wanted to cover him from a media perspective because he was just such a pain in everyone's ass.
Yeah. Wow. That's Albert Bell is a guy. And he's a guy that you like always, you're like, he's the kind of guy you're just jealous that Cleveland, they had so many of these guys. I mean, the fact that Albert Bell gets overshadowed by multiple players on that team is a real testament to how good that team was. Kenny Lofton, by the way, and we've talked about him before, he's my number one Hall of Fame. He's my number one or number two like Hall of Fame snubs, in my opinion, is Kenny Lofton. I mean, he's like,
he was a great center fielder, traditional center fielder too.
Is genuinely as good as Ichiro. And it's not to take away from Ichiro's career. Kenny Lofton had an incredible career, and I think he got less than 1% of the vote in his first year of eligibility and got knocked off the ballot.
Because the 90s were just so outweighed by the home run hitters, Yep. And credit to Mike Hargrove. Think about the personalities on that 95 Cleveland team. You got Albert Bell. You got Manny. Manny's kind of weird. Albert Bell's an asshole. Kenny Lofton he's a superstar in his own right, so I'm sure he, could maybe have some diva tendencies. We don't know. Alomar and Vizquel, 2 other big names. You got Jim Thome, who's a nice guy, really good player, completely different than those other guys we mentioned personality-wise. You got a set of brothers on the team, and you got Robbie Alomar and Sandy Alomar, so you've got like this weird family dynamic. Mike Hargrove
pitchers on this team. Was that a year Chuck Finley or something like that? Is Chuck Finley a pitcher on that team?
Let me look here really quick. Let's see. So that 95 year, they actually did not have Robbie Alomar yet. So he must have come the next year thereafter. But they still had Carlos Baerga at second. Their pitching leaves something to be desired. I think their ace that year they had 2 aging vets that were kind of anchoring their staff. They had Oral Hershiser towards the end of his career, and they had Dennis Martinez, if you remember him. He was most good with Montreal. And I think Dennis Martinez actually had a brief cameo with the Mariners in his mid-40s after this. He's 41 this year, 95. Jeez. I think Dennis Martinez, like a year or two later, has a brief cameo with the Mariners before he hangs it up. So they got those 2 guys. They got Charles Nagy, who was kind of in his prime and was like a decent right right-hander. And then they got a bunch of guys that most people probably would not remember. So
they're pitching.
Mesa,
I'm pulling them up right now. It's Jose Mesa. Jose Mesa is the closer. Okay,
Mesa's the closer. I'll never forget that
saves.
part. Mesa was on the mound when I was at the game that Cleveland closes out the ALCS against the Mariners, and Mesa was the one who locked down the save. So never forget that. Yeah, that he was dominant then, and then of course he comes to the Mariners and is very average.
Joe Table, baby.
But yeah, so Mike Hargrove manages all these weird personalities on this Cleveland team, and then it's the Mariners of all things that make him quit baseball. What does that say about us? He can handle these divas, but he comes to Seattle, experiences some losing, and actually the team was really good when he left them. They had gone on this amazing run, and they were like in the playoff hunt, and he quit. The Mariners made him quit. We ruined people here in Seattle, apparently.
That's right.
That's it.
All right. So mine for you is I think it's gonna feel like a similar career trajectory, actually, which is, I don't know why this happened, but we were talking about the Braves earlier. Andrew Jones is mine, a guy who similarly had a good start to his career and then body type changed, and so did the results. And a guy who I think is if Kenny Lofton is number one, Andrew Jones is 1A, of a guy who is just underappreciated because the narrative of his career, as opposed to the production, kept him out of the Hall of Fame. I'm going to stop talking about him and let you give me your information. You're
right. He was a really, really good center fielder. He came up when he was like 20 years old, and I think it was 96. Maybe, I think it was 96 or 97. At some point where the Braves were in their heyday, he comes up and anchors down center field for a few years for them. And then after his Braves days are done, it seems like he kind of goes on an odyssey around baseball as like a hired hitter. And he really isn't the center fielder he was. He gets bigger. He's more of a DH. But he ends up having a longer career than I think a lot of people would remember, because he just kind of hung around with teams on like 1-year deals or 2-year deals for a while there. So he ends up playing, I think, longer than maybe we think. He might even go to like the early 2010s or thereabouts and really gets his start in like the mid to late 90s. And he's a thumper. I mean, when he comes up, even as a dominant center fielder, he can really hit the ball. So he probably has some big seasons in there. And then I know towards the end, when he's a hired bat as a DH, basically, he's still putting up decent home run numbers. He's just not giving you anything else. I feel like I've seen him on home run lists before, and he's like surprisingly high. So I'm going to say, I doubt he got to the 500s. I'm going to say 425.
God damn, the process works great. So I'm going to make the Hall of Fame case for him first, and we'll talk about home runs in a second. The man won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Gold Gloves. He wins a Silver Slugger. He second in the MVP voting in 2005 with 51 home runs, and wins the Gold Glove that year. He's a many-time All-Star. Obviously, he's on those like legacy Braves teams that are playing in a hitter's park. He also, by the way, if you remember, was the subject of the earliest Ken Griffey Jr. trade rumors.
I do remember that. Yeah,
something like a straight across Griffey for Andrew Jones, which, I mean, I think like history.
That would have been a pretty good trade.
Yeah,
it would have been a good trade. Yeah.
And then, yeah, like you said, he spends the second half of his career, and it is nearly half of his career. I mean, it's probably like the latter third of his career, more realistically. He gains some weight and is no longer. He wins a Gold Glove in 2007 with the Braves. And then he goes to the Dodgers on, I don't know what the contract was actually, but he spends 1 year with the Dodgers, 3 home runs, only 75 games. Obviously has this weight issue. He doesn't even, how many games does he play? I wonder how many games. I mean, I guess it's a National League team, so he's playing a lot of games in center field. And then, yeah, spends the next couple of years bouncing between, he goes from the Dodgers to Texas to the White Sox, and then 2 years with the Yankees before his career ends. He ends his career, by the way, with 13 and 14 home runs in limited playing time. So, like, not a
What year is his last year?
2012. You were right on that. 17 years of baseball. And yeah, I think a career that's like really gets over defined by the final third. 434 home runs. You're 9 off, which is great. But a guy who hit 434 home runs in that era with like no real steroid accusations to my knowledge, a guy who was like one of the purest defensive center fielders, and then for that guy to have a bat at all makes him so valuable, but to become one of the league's better power hitters he was such a great player. And there was a play I watched of Andrew Jones, by the way, not to belabor this if you're getting text messages that you need to fucking start contributing to your family. I remember watching a play on like Web Gems or Sports Center Top Plays or whatever, where I watched it and I was like, there's no way he's getting to that ball. And he gets to the ball, and then they showed another. I watched like the replay of Sports Center. I had already seen the play. This ball, like a line drive into the gap, and he makes this diving play, fully laid out like a superhero, like a real diving play. And again, I just like I was like, "There's no way." I had already seen it and couldn't allow myself to believe he was going to get to this ball. Just such an incredible center fielder, and 434 home runs, not in the Hall of Fame, despite being
And the guys I feel like guys in the 90s and early 2000s era, it was tough for them to stand out from one another for a couple. I mean, we've talked a lot about just kind of like the steroid era and the inflated numbers. But the other thing that kind of stands out to me is like now you have with social media, we know who the good players are because everything they do that's good is shown to us. There's an algorithm that says if you're a baseball fan and you're looking at baseball highlights on any social media site, we're just going to keep feeding you those highlights and you're going to see the great plays from all the great players out there. And like, I feel like now there are so many players around baseball that feel like surefire Hall of Famers when in the 90s and even early 2000s, like you might cherry pick a small handful of people that you thought might make the Hall of Fame. And Andrew Jones was maybe in that discussion at some point and then later on not. But I think just the visibility into those guys and the ability to stand out in that era was very difficult to do. And it's unique to that era because in the 80s and before, you don't have the media the way that you do now. Like the coverage is just not the same. So the guys who stand out because you had to look at the newspaper and look at their stats and agree that their numbers were good, right? And then the media coverage comes along and it's tailored towards certain areas or certain teams. And if you were not part of that group, and granted, I mean, the Braves did get a lot of media coverage because people could watch them nationally. And in that regard, it's kind of surprising that he gets forgotten. But there is something to be said for those guys that bounce around a lot between teams. They always get overlooked because there's just not a loyal group of people kind of backing their case for the Hall of Fame. And that might be the case with Andrew Jones. But I agree, man. He is one of those guys. I feel like a generation or two from now, the MLB Veterans Committee is going to be doing a lot of work for a lot of guys like that, trying to get them into the Hall of Fame. Yeah,
for sure. All right. Well, I think I managed to have an internet issue an hour and 48 minutes into our recording somehow. So that's positive that it took that long.
No,
unless I've just been chopping up on your side and I didn't know. But
no, it's been good. It's been good.
Cool. Well, I think we did it. Also, by the way, Bickerson's Brewhouse, and I'll promote this as we go, but we have dates through the rest of the year, which is let me pull them up real quick so that I don't disappoint my good pal Frank, who I think likes me more than you now, by the way.
Well, you make him money. I don't do anything for him.
That is true. October 27th, November 18th, and December 16th are the remaining dates. Good lineups booked for all but December, and I'm sure we'll get someone great for December also. The Casey McLean on Twitter or X, whatever. We also missed the period of time where now you can't even on my phone. I used to be able to type in Twitter and it would bring up X still. Now I can't even type in that. I have to type in X, which is a real bummer for me because I so reflexively type in Twitter on the search thing. Because I try to
all
keep
the typing that you've wasted
at the back of my phone, like on the back menus, so that I don't spend my entire day on it. And
smart.
Also, Casey McLean comedy everywhere else.
Alex SSN for me. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Bye. Hold on.
Bye.